That's for you.
What's that? Yeah, well, this is all true. Graphically, this is all right on target. First of all, Sarah, thank you. Adam, thank you. Ken, thank you. Jerry, thank you. And all of you, it's great to be here. I always, whenever there's a possibility of joining you and sharing some ideas, I always jump at the possibility. I'm a long time worked with the Likud for as a friend and a researcher for a long time, having shared with American Friends of Likud for a long time. So when Adam said there was a possibility our schedules match, I said, great, let's meet. And Sarah, this is all terrific, and a lovely lunch. It all works really, really well. I wanted to come with a very brief message that we talked about around the sandwich table outside, which is because I want to speak for really just a very few minutes to lay out the guidelines, perhaps, and the goal post, the parameters of the discussion, and then engage everyone in the discussion, questions, and comments. I mean, that's the best way I think that we all learn from one another. I'd like to bring you what Adam Fishman calls the insider briefing, and what I try to do when I come to these briefings is actually bring some actual fresh, new inside information that we might not be able to get, even with all the Twitter traffic going on. That's really good, and the Facebook traffic, a lot of which is really good. You can learn some fairly valuable information, and I try to meet people, and I have relationships on the other side of the ocean that sometimes reveal some really unusual information, unusual for us there, but I think now information that confirms what we've thought over the last 6 years. And I must say that I'm quite optimistic about Israel's position in this very turbulent moment. It's Lag BaOmer in Israel. Bonfires are burning. There's no government right now, just in terms of context. There's no government. As many of you know through the tweet traffic, the Twitter traffic, there are intensive negotiations going on at this very moment, not between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Naftali Bennett, the Jewish Home Party, but within the Jewish Home Party. They're trying to figure out who is going to get the first best ministry, who's going to get the second best ministry, and they've opened up Attorney Biden. They've opened up the agreements to see Uri Ariel of the Tkuma faction within the Beit Yehudi is. So
they have all the other coalition agreements?
Well, they have. I mean, everything's signed except for Beit Yehudi to get the 61 mandate. They need 61. Obviously, Lieberman is in the opposition. He's resigned his position as foreign minister, and we'll talk about those implications a little bit later.
Is everybody else's agreement, everybody else's coalition agreement, open to everybody else?
Are they all transparent, you mean, to everybody else?
Just everybody have access to them?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I think certainly through the grapevine within everybody knows within the parliament who's got what and what's going on, but is it legally binding that everybody knows? I don't know the answer. It's a good question. We need to find out. But I do think, Sarah, that there's within this very uncertain political context that and it is a context of great uncertainty. Elections are hundreds of millions of shekels, and we at this juncture may well be looking at a government that could last a year until we get to budgets, and unless, and I've held firmly to this position that I think ultimately we will be in a national unity government as we move forward, because I believe that, and this is a good transition, I think, into the next 10 minutes of discussion, of presentation, or 12 minutes, is that the Iranian issue is so serious in the mind of the Prime Minister and those around him that it really will, more than ever before, be a defining element in the domestic political scene and the structure of the coming government. I think that people in Israel even were surprised at the level of fortitude that the Prime Minister has shown in going to in sticking to his guns, if you will, on the Iranian issue. I mean, we have not seen this before. We have not seen Israeli prime ministers. We did stand up to American administration. We did see Shamir to stand up to the American administration in 1991. He did go to Madrid, but his opening speech was very strong. But I think that he conceded a lot more publicly, I think, that certainly in the first Iraq war, when he, against his own better judgment, held back and did not join the attack against Saddam Hussein and paid a price for that. I think the price he paid for that was, in a sense, the outgrowth of Madrid into Oslo. Even though Rabin won the election in 1992, we certainly didn't see this type of fortitude with former Prime Minister Rabin of blessed memory, who did not ultimately stand up to the Ford administration over relations with Egypt in 1970, after the 1973 war, when the United States pressured Israel tremendously. Remember that, Jerry, to accept the Egyptian position of a situation of non-belligerent. Thank you, Jacob. Non-belligerent, as opposed to a much more advantageous position for Israel, and he folded ultimately to the Ford administration. And here, I think that even if you read if you don't read Israel Hayom, but read the others, the Kenny Abramowitz paper, Haaretz, you would even hear from people like Barak Ravid that he's shown a level of steadfastness that we haven't seen before on this particular issue. And clearly, as everyone around this table knows, there's really a wall-to-wall consensus in Israel over the fact that Iran and its proxies pose a great strategic existential threat to Israel. I think this is where the break is between what Israel understands in its own experience, as opposed to what many Americans have not been exposed to and don't understand. And certainly the American administration, either they don't understand or they do understand and they don't want to appeal to it, but they don't want to deal with it. But when Netanyahu said in his congressional speech that the agreement is a bad deal, I would have used the word just a dangerous deal, and because Iran has to change its behavior as one of the improvements. That is a key, that is an absolutely critical piece of language, to change its behavior, because at the end of the day, what the Israelis understand and what the Arab world understands, what the Arab world understands is that the threat by Iran is not the nuclear threat per se. That's being overplayed. It's the fact that Hezbollah has 100,000 rockets and Hamas has 25,000 rockets, and Islamic Jihad in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria is funded and directed. The fact that Iran is now reconstructing the entire tunnel system in Gaza, and is almost complete. It is tearing Hamas and pulling it into its orbit in a much stronger way than they even did in the towards the mid 90s to the late 90s, when they tore them away from Saudi Arabia. The Iranians are really looking at Gaza as another forward base for the Islamic Republic in a very substantial.
So the border closed with Egypt, effectively, how are they getting materials for the tunnel?
They're getting them through ships. The ships they don't catch. They only catch one every. They don't catch every ship. They don't catch it, and not all the tunnels. Even though Al-Sisi has done a very good job in cementing the tunnels with people in them to make the point. Okay.
That never gets front page.
It sure doesn't, and he would like it to stay that way. Now let me just lay out the thesis.
I just saw that they actually discovered some more like underground tunnels.
Yes.
I saw on Facebook that
they're correct. They're redoing them with Iranians' help from Gaza City, from northern Gaza into Israel. Again, they're restructuring them. But let me I sort of went on a side road here just to sort of lay out some context and some color. But I want to be very clear about what the idea is here, the thesis here. I had a very unusual lunch last week at the train station, where many of you go, right? The old train station, the old Jerusalem train station, which has now been converted, the Tahana, which has now been turned into an outdoor mall with restaurants and so on. And the Voice of Israel, which is the radio station, which I have the program called National Security, is right around the corner. That's the Erel Margalit's Jerusalem venture, Jerusalem high-tech startup, and where Voice of Israel has its studio, so we come to lunch. I met a very high-ranking former Jordanian intelligence official there, who we'll call General Abd Salam. We'll call him General Abd Salam. And he was in Israel recently, has a permanent pass to come into Israel. He had been a very close associate of King Hussein for 3 decades, and has seen everything on both sides of the Jordan River. And we sat down to try to we had seen each other before, and I'll explain to you in what context. And the first thing he did, he said, well, we looked at the menu and said, well, can we order some wine? And this was not a Christian, this was a Muslim. And so I asked the resident sommelier, in other words, the waiter, if we could have a wine list. And he gave us the wine list, and he looked down and he said, tell me, what are the best wines here? I said, in my opinion, General Absalam, the Yarden Merlot, 2009 Golan Heights. He said, Golan Heights? You know what? The hell with it. We'll piss off the Syrians today. And we ordered a bottle of Yarden Merlot 2009, and we annoyed the Syrians. I will say that the general was in great concern about the Syrians. Not only he was a way of getting back at them, but what he said in the next moment, which was really telling, was he said, and we spoke Arabic. It was translated to me. My Arabic is not conversational, but the people I was with spoke Arabic, so the conversation was in Arabic, and which was very important because culturally things are communicated that wouldn't be communicated in English, and then it was then translated. And what he said was, and it was coming through simultaneous translation, he said, the Middle East today would not exist if it were not for Israel. The Middle East today as we know it would not exist if it were not for Israel. And he said, the Palestinians, instead of moaning, should be thanking Israel that the so-called Arab Spring has not come to the West Bank, in his words. And it was really quite a moment. This is a Jordanian intelligence, a general. This is someone who's seen it all and been there. By the way, this very general was involved in intelligence gathering when the station was under attack in 1967, right? Because it's right over the wall. And there we were, ironically then, having wine from the Golan Heights and having lunch and discussing why he thought that Israel was absolutely essential to whatever is left of the Arab state system. I mean, just think about, let's wrap our heads around that for a moment.
But we know that.
What's that?
Right? We actually know that these people are living with security.
Yes.
We know that.
Yes, we know that, but the fact that the Jordanians are someone who's going to say that is telling. Because he's not the only Arab ex-official and current officials who are saying that. That's why it's interesting. That's why it's noteworthy. And he went on to say, from his point of view, he said, when he as a Jordanian looks outwards, he doesn't see any secure borders except for Israel. When he looks outward, he doesn't see any secure trade except for the Haifa port. Because all the Jordanian trucks that were going to Latakia in Syria are not going there because they don't come back, middle of the war zone. So Israel has increased the number, its approvals, its permissions for Jordanian trucks, and they're coming, scores and scores of trucks are coming into Israel to the Haifa port, picking up, sending out, this is real national security cooperation. And the other issue is, and these are my thoughts as I'm trying to interpret what he means. As I think about the economic, the national, the political, military security issues here of the Jordanians, how Israel is acting as a security anchor for the Jordanians, going much beyond the narrow Palestinian issue, but talking about Iran and ISIS and keeping Jordan on the map. Keeping Jordan on the map as the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, which is really struggling now with 2 million Syrian refugees. Inside information. Listening on the phone, inside information. Israel is sending emergency transfers of fresh drinking water to make sure that those refugees have what to drink. It's not been reported. It is only Israel that is taking water that goes beyond the agreements, the on an issue, a humanitarian issue. And many, so-called Syrian refugees are not all good guys, so to speak, right? And Israel is actually enabling, the Jordanians know it, oh boy do they.
What about the refugees?
Well, the refugees that get taken to the Israeli field hospital in the north over the border know it. And there have been many, many stories about that. That's one of the most Israeli political, public diplomacy stories to emerge. in recently. It's our new Haiti. So Nepal is our new Haiti, but it's a great example of what goes on. I think it's strong. Yeah, but we'll talk about that in a minute. That's a separate problem, the way the international media, because they have their own, they have certainly a narrative. They have a certain set of beliefs that they have to support, or the editor has his own beliefs, or her own beliefs.
Yeah, false narrative. This information isn't widely disseminated, though, is it? Because most people don't know this is in fact occurring.
Right, no, because I'll tell you why. Because when it comes to relations between Israel and its Arab neighbors, and right now we're just focusing on Jordan for a moment, the last thing that they want is to expose it. And in a way, on the one hand, it's too bad because we are living through an unprecedented type of public diplomacy warfare, political warfare, by Iran, by the Islamists, and by the Palestinians, by the way, driven in by and large by the Palestinians, a type of diplomatic terrorism in order to cause Israel, in a sense, to collapse in terms of legitimacy, that would indicate that we should be, issuing, these stories should come out. But herein comes the complications of dealing with our Arab neighbors. It's the last thing that any of them want is to experience the shame of admitting what they know to be true, which is that Israel is, headline of today's talk, Israel is the new warrior for the Arab world against Iran, the Iranian regime, and radical Islam. Full stop. And they know it, and General Abdul Salam said it, besides, and he listed some of these examples, not to mention, by the way, the desalinization plant that Israel is building for Jordan in Aqaba, and then is going to buy desalinated water from Jordan to strengthen its economy. And not to mention the fact that Israel and Jordan have extremely tight security arrangements right now, and always have, but certainly when it comes to Hezbollah, Hamas. In fact, you may be aware that Prime Minister recently went to sit with the king, and within hours, 18 members of radical Islamic groups associated with Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran were arrested in Jordan for attempting to send shipments of advanced weaponry from Jordan into the West Bank, into Judea and Samaria. So these types of cooperation really have intensified the dependency, for example, on Jordan, on Israel. And by the way, this particular general and I had actually worked together. There's historical context to our meeting that he recognized the Iranian problem vis-a-vis the Arab world. In 2008, we met in a secret forum in Rome to discuss the possibility, and it went on for over a year, of a confederation between the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria and the Hashemite kingdom. And it was approved at that time by the king, those discussions. And it's all comes out of, remember the king's discussion, the king's headline in 2004? He first called it the Shiite Crescent. What he meant was Iran is taking over Iraq, and Iran is taking over Damascus, and has taken over Damascus, and Iran, Lebanon. And now we know that Iran is taking over Sana'a. Iran is controlling Yemen, and obviously the waterway there. And so obviously, what King Abdullah II had understood 11 years ago has really come true, and it really is that Shiite. Some people, students of the region, don't like to call it a Shiite crescent because there are many good Shiites out there that hate the Iranian regime, but it's an Iranian regime crescent that today controls 5 capitals, including their own, and influences every single country in the Middle East, and is controlling terrorism in Latin America, including Mexico and including the tri-border area down south. But from an Arab point of view, and clearly the Jordanian general understood that Israel is the only way that the Jordanian monarchy and state, as we know it, can survive, and he said it very clearly. Now, he's not the only one, which is why I said to Sarah before, this could be like a talk for 50 minutes about Jordan and then the Palestinians, and then what do we do in order to guarantee that the triangle works, Jordan, Palestinian issue, and Israel. But no, we're hearing this from Saudi Arabia. And we started to hear this 6 years ago, very well-placed buzzing that there is a really tightening relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But only over the last 6 years, and really recently, if you're reading, not only news reports, but getting into some of the commentary and analysis that's being done by some of the think tanks, we understand the depth of the type of relationship. I'll give you another headline. In the program that I host, and I hope that some of you will have the time to listen if you go to voiceofisrael.com, national security, we really try to discuss these issues on a very high level. And Bassem Eid, who maybe some of you know here, who is a Palestinian commentator, very, very fair and friendly to Israel. He sometimes co-hosts the program together, so we have a Palestinian view and an Israeli view. And he said that he reminded me the other day that hours after Netanyahu spoke at the joint session of Congress, the lead headline in Al-Akhbar, not the one in Lebanon, the one in London that's published by the Saudi, by the kingdom, said, "Thank you, Netanyahu. Thank you, Netanyahu." That was the headline in the biggest paper out of Saudi Arabia. And, that is obviously that's a very meaningful development that there would be this type of public admission, and I think it really reflects the level of frustration of the Saudis. Many of you who may have read the Wall Street Journal this morning noticed that the moves of Prime Minister Hollande in Saudi Arabia and the responses of the Saudis to how frustrated they are and suspicious they are that the United States might not be able to supply them what the French would be able to supply them is the latest indication of the type of public frustrations that the Saudis are voicing. But the fact is that in terms of the Israeli-Saudi relationship which is mirrored, the intensity of it is mirrored by the dissatisfaction of the Saudis towards the United States is extraordinary, just on an operative level. I mean, we're talking about reports of landing rights and rescue missions and air rights. I mean, like really intense type of stuff that you would only expect from Israel's European or American alliances. But you fly over, refueling, landing rights. I wouldn't be surprised, pure speculation, I wouldn't be surprised if there are also storage, the issue of storing planes, pure speculation. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the Saudis are so concerned, as the rest of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council is, and the Arab League, about Iran. We have not seen the Saudi military bombing Yemen. I mean, they're actually growing up and taking action, which they hadn't done in the past. This is extraordinary. Without prejudice, what's the expression? The bombing without prejudice. And now it's a reflection of the new king, very much so. What's
the Israeli position about possible sales of F-35 of that agreement? While we're on this defense.
Are you talking about from France to Saudi Arabia? Right?
Well, the United States.
Well, they're going to make a play next week for those sales, and we'll see. Yeah, I would be. Well, if we went back in time 40 years, we'd be having one type of discussion about that, right? AWACS and so on.
Right. There's a piece of questions for people there. The question is for Dan right now. What's the Israeli perspective about the possible sale of American F-35s to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Americans and the Iranians, I mean, the White House and the Iranians are. I mean, I think the Iranian regime has certainly prevailed over the White House to back off of.
Yes, because that's yes. You said it's astonishing. That's very important.
Well, it would be astonishing if I were an official, but I'm only a private person.
And I understand that, but yes, you could state what.
Well, which part of the thing are you about to pin me?
Okay, so I asked. You said it's not going to happen because the Americans and the Iranians.
Well, I think that the White House is extremely careful not to do anything that would upset this deal, and I think we've seen it in its Syria policy. I mean, we've seen it in Syria policy. We've seen it in decisions that are very difficult to figure out in other areas of the Middle East as well. And I think this is my my personal assessment, I think that this is no exception. I think my personal view is that the Iranians have had a lot of influence over the president in terms of, when you're writing letters back and forth to the Ayatollah, and it's only discovered 4 or 5 years later, obviously it shapes your view. It shapes his view about what should and shouldn't happen in the Middle East. It has to do with one wonders in this regard, how is it that the United States offered to broker a ceasefire last summer between its closest ally, one of its closest allies, maybe its closest ally, arguably, the State of Israel, and a internationally recognized terror organization, the Hamas. But, can we wrap our heads around that for a minute? The United States is going to broker a ceasefire between a terror organization considered by the Europeans and the Americans as a terror organization and the State of Israel. I can't quite figure that out. And then it offered Qatar, or Qatar, as it say here, and Turkey, the two of the real opponents of Israel, and Egypt. So you basically at that time had Israel and Egypt aligned, and America, Turkey, and Iran and Qatar aligned. And by the way, Qatar is an enemy of Egypt today, and Turkey and Egypt don't do well together today because they're both vying for leadership of the Muslim world in the Middle East. The Turks, of course, are not Arabs, or the Sunni world. And so you try to. How do you understand that? Well, one way of understanding it is that if the Iranian relationship is the umbrella relationship that this administration wants to pursue, if they believe they can cut a grand deal, then anything that would contradict that wouldn't be pursued. That's what I'm saying. So let me just I'm going to wrap it up now. And that's Saudi Arabia, and then we get to the Kurds, and of course there have been the Kurds and Israel there's been a lot of contact, and then the Kurds are obviously natural friends of the Jewish people, and they are really fighting for their piece of territory in northwest Syria, and they themselves are looking towards a federal solution. They don't want their own state; they want a federal solution with autonomy in northwest Syria, and they have been making the Kurds have been making very serious for 3 or 4 years now. They've been extending their hand very, very seriously and aggressively towards Israel for help in that regard. And then we get to the Palestinian Authority, and clearly the Palestinian Authority would not exist today at all if Israel didn't save it every Monday and Thursday. Those are the days that we take out the Torah, Monday and Thursday. Yeah, that would be right. That would be the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority clearly wants a security arrangement with Israel more than it wants or is able to have a national unity government with Hamas. That is, everyone here knows, is an absolute fraud, this national unity government. Just to show you how unified the national unity government is between Hamas and Fatah, Hamas took Fatah senior officials captive last week and put them in a hotel in Gaza over the fact that Abu Mazen wouldn't release budget that is in the PA annual budget. You know that Hamas gets almost 50% of the annual PA budget, and which is right donated. But there's American contribution and there's European contribution. It's extraordinary. And people try to fudge it, and people try to ignore it. But this is the bottom line is that the West is funding Hamas indirectly by funding the Palestinian Authority. They know that they're actually PA employees, and there's a lot of stuff, and a lot of PA employees. Fatah people don't go to work in Gaza; they just get paid, which the Hamas tells them don't go to work, you don't show up. And so back to Israel and the PA, but Israel actually saves the Fatah and its Palestinian Authority from being overthrown by the Hamas all the time, and it was just the last few months. It was the last time. So that's just another sense of dependence.
So DOA, just from their mission in Washington, which was the NORPAC, one of the talking points was not to give financial assistance to the Palestinian Authority.
Right.
So I didn't even know then that the 50% was the annual budget. But the problem we always have is that Israel gives it to them, and then they'll say, well, Israel gives it to them because they have to have a moderate regime. So
this is a problem.
How do we fight that?
It's very difficult to fight that question because the general staff of the Israeli army likes the fact that there is a perceived address in Ramallah that they can deal with. And that's why they would actually oppose the cessation of monies to the Palestinian Authority because if, in their view, if they collapse, then Israel will invariably and inevitably have to play a much stronger role in administering the West Judea and Samaria in the Palestinian-controlled areas of Judea and Samaria. They don't even want to. They don't even want to entertain that.
So there shouldn't be a talking point then.
No, the talking point is not to stop. I mean, the talking point is that there should be audits. There should be audits. There should be American auditors on the ground auditing how those budgets are used every day. I mean, if the United States is talking about having nuclear auditors, right? That's what Kerry's been saying. Oh, every day, on the ground, every day, forever. Oh, well, let's do that on the Palestinians. That's something that the Europeans and the Americans have been really bad at. Is having their accountants on the ground and their fact checkers. Because obviously the massive corruption of the Palestinian Authority is well known. But that's talking about not to stop the money from coming in from an Israel. That's not my position. That's the position of the General Staff. I know that for confidently.
And how much chance do we have that happening?
Of what?
Happening.
I think that everybody in Israel would be very happy.
No, I'm saying,
They just don't want it. They don't want to help. They spend so much time preventing the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. They don't want to help it along by just having more unemployed people. I mean,
it's a complex, but it's the same problem we had that after the war in Gaza. One of the questions I asked when we had a meeting, not on the same Zoom, at the Conference of Presidents, first question I asked is how do we stop the tunnels from being rebuilt? Can we use the international community? And what about the cement? And Israel's giving them cement again because they're being pressured to. And we have not done anything. So my question is, we talk about good ideas, which this is a good idea, but it would be a good idea to try to get some international help to make sure those...
The international, but the...
here too, to get something to audit it, we try to get it done.
Yeah, well, that's one kind of international help. What we should know that the international community on rebuilding Gaza has completely failed. They've done nothing. So you know who's rebuilding Gaza? Israel's rebuilding Gaza with certain Hamas elements. I mean, we're sort of to help the population. I mean, this is how complicated it is.
It's foreseeable that it was now.
They've done nothing. And the Gazans are blaming Hamas and blaming the international community and blaming Hamas. They're not blaming Israel. In other words, Israel, it's a very nuanced type of national security policy where Israel is trying to, through a type of political influence, mobilize leverage of the public against the Hamas in order to what's that?
Winning the hearts and minds.
Winning hearts and minds of the public, exactly. It's political warfare, winning hearts and minds.
But apparently, Dan, the people alone are selling the concrete or cement that they're getting, selling it.
No, they're being forced to sell it.
They're being forced to sell?
They're being pressured.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a different...
So then finally...
Yeah. All right, should we start with those?
Yeah, finally, and then finally, the greatest partnership Israel has today is with Egypt. I mean, it's a level of partnership that goes way beyond what Israel ever had with Egypt before. Sadat, Mubarak, obviously Morsi, but real partnership. And we saw that in the war last summer. We saw Egypt proposing 6 or 7 ceasefires. Israel accepting every time there was a ceasefire. Israel obviously supports Morsi. Morsi. So Sisi looks at Hamas, and this is what a friend from Egypt told me the other day. A friend who said, look, Hamas is killing our soldiers in Sinai. For them, Hamas is Al Qaeda. For them, Hamas is Al Qaeda. And there is Al Qaeda also, and there's other ISIS elements, and there's a lot of mixing of these people in Sinai. And there's a great partnership between Israel and Egypt. So to end this little mini presentation, this is what Amos Gilad, the head of the political military desk of the defense ministry, said is the moderate Sunni crescent. The moderate Sunni crescent is Egypt, Jordan, the Gulf states, and Israel. Basically, Israel becomes the guest in the Sunni. So there you have the Shiite crescent opposite the battling with the moderate Sunni crescent. And Bassem Eid, my co-host, said to me he thinks that Israel should be invited to join the Arab League as a guest. He said it on the air as a guest. No one wonders how realistic that is, but it shows there really is a shift. There's also a shift among the Israeli Arab public, a positive shift. They have a much more positive view of Israel. Many Palestinian Christian citizens of Israel are want to go to the army in much higher numbers. People, you heard the Bedouin soldier on Independence Day said on television, when you see what's going on with Daesh, and Al-Qaeda, you understand the best place for any Arab to be is right here in Israel. So this is just as an overall sense. I'm very optimistic now about Israel, how they will come out of it, less dependent in a sense, certainly politically, on the United States, and much more being forced to look in other directions, China, India, and the Arab world, much more dependent on Israel. It's only temporary. I would not trust that you have to really take a look at the long-term quality of those relationships. But I think we all have reason to be optimistic. Israel is growing up. Israel is becoming much more realistic. The Israeli public is understanding that the Palestinian issue is not the cause of all the problems in the Middle East, nor is it the cause of all the problems in Israel. I think that type of shift that's been caused by this terrible Iranian foreign policy difficulty, generated by Western powers, has taught us this. So I think there's a silver lining in all of this.
Okay, I'm going to ask the first question.
There's a silver lining in all of this.
Okay, I'm going to ask the first question.
There's a silver lining in all of this.
Okay, I'm going to ask the first question.
There's a silver lining in all of this.
Okay, I'm going to ask the first question.
There's a silver lining in all of this.